Hi, this is Jim Walsh, candidate for the Washington State House, Legislative District 19, Position 1. I'd like to talk with you for a few minutes today about public school funding and whether we need to institute a state income tax in Washington to fully fund basic education. I believe we don't. I believe that by reforming our current structure of property tax formulation, we can properly fund K-12 education. Courts and education policy experts say that Washington's K-12 funding needs to be reliable, ample, and equitable. Reliable means funding shouldn't be subject to voter approval every year or two. Ample means the state should provide about $12,500 per student per year to each school district. And equitable means, well, there's not as much agreement about that. I believe the most equitable way to answer the K-12 funding issues raised by the Washington State Supreme Court's McCleary decision is to reform the local levy equalization process that already influences how property taxes are collected and used. If we do this properly, we won't need to create a new state income tax or use accounting gimmicks to fully fund basic education. When you pay property taxes, part of that money stays in the county that collects it, and part goes to Olympia, which pools the money from all around the state and then sends chunks of it back to local school districts to fund their operations. Currently, the equalization formula allows taxpayers in counties with lower average assessed property values to pay slightly less into that state pool, but not enough less. The current equalization formula was put in place about 20 years ago. Since then, the differences between assessed values in various places around the state of Washington have grown larger. So today, property owners in places like Bellevue and Mercer Island pay relatively little on a percentage basis, usually around $1 per thousand of assessed value, while people in places like Aberdeen and Longview pay a much higher percentage, usually between $3 and $4 per thousand. As a result, taxpayers in those poorer areas are bumping up against the legal limits on how much property tax can be charged. And they have to make hard choices about funding schools, fire and police departments, hospitals, libraries, and other public services. This is one of the main reasons that some people criticize Washington's tax formulas as regressive. We need to make our local levy equalization formula bigger so that the dollars per thousand of assessed value that property owners around the state pay are closer to the same. Some people call the levy equalization process a levy swap, and there's nothing wrong with that term. I prefer not to use it though, because it's come to stand for half measures and partial solutions that don't do enough for rural areas. I'd like to make the dollar per thousand rate flat so that all property owners in the state pay the same percentage toward K-12 education. If we set everyone at a K-12 levy rate of about $3 per thousand of assessed value, we'll raise enough money to meet the requirements outlined by the state Supreme Court in its McCleary decision. Now, some people argue that flattening this K-12 levy is impossible politically, that it's a massive tax increase for certain Washingtonians, and that it will be dead on arrival in Olympia. I don't agree. I'm more optimistic. It may be difficult, but it's a negotiation, and the right negotiation to have. For too long, people who live in Washington's high property value zip codes, including most of the judges who wrote the McCleary decision, have dictated how school funding and management must work. Then they leave it to the rest of us to do the actual funding and managing. It's time for those folks to have more skin in the game. The move to a flatter system of local K-12 levies will also have some side effects that could be good overall reforms. For one thing, it will cut across conventional Democrat versus Republican lines. The negotiation will be more like an urban-rural one. That will bring to the surface some public policy tensions that have existed in Olympia for years. So we'll be able to talk about those more honestly, and we'll be able to make that regressive tax system more progressive and fairer. Finally, as I mentioned before, a flatter K-12 property tax levy eliminates the need for a state income tax, and that's better for all Washingtonians. This is Jim Walsh, candidate for the Washington State House, Legislative District 19, Position 1. I'd like your vote in November. Thanks for listening.